Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ossie Michelin. I'm a Labrador Inuk and journalist from Northwest River in Labrador, and I'm also an editor-at-large with Canadian Art Magazine. Today we'll be speaking with 7 different Northern Indigenous peoples, all about issues related to art, access, and representation. We have 7 questions for each of the speakers, and everybody will have a chance to respond or pass. But first, let's do a round of introductions. And if everybody could please start by just saying who you are and what do you do in life. So let's begin with Tamika. You're on my left. Would you like to start first with the introduction?
Yeah. Hi. My name is Tamika Knutson. I'm Trondheim from Dawson City, Yukon. I currently live in Whitehorse right now. I work for the art section at the Yukon government, and I do funding programs, and then I also work in the visual arts with the permanent art collection and kind of maintaining that collection and all sorts of stuff. And I'm an artist. Yeah, so I think that's everything.
Cool. Brian, you're to my right. Would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Brian Winters. I am originally from Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador. I'm of Inuk and Irish Newfoundland settler descent, and lived all over Southern Canada. I lived in Halifax for 10 years, Montreal for 4, Toronto now for 4. And for half of that time, I've been the executive director for the Toronto Inuit Association. Naulaq.
Awesome. Jessica, you're next in line, if you don't mind.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jessica Qulliq. I'm originally from qulliq. I live in Iqaluit. I'm the manager curator of the Nunavut Museum. I went to school for collections management and conservation. And I like to watch lots of films. Yeah.
Awesome. Teresa, would you go next, please?
Sure. Dine ke dochen ana jonsi no gle ke Teresa Van Mershase jonsi shna thil kai monsi shna wuna tsai jitsu monsi titsani tsan dite nisu dite. Hello, my name is Teresa Van Mershase. I am a member of the White River First Nation of Beaver Creek, Yukon. I'm currently in Lekwungen territory, so that's Victoria, British Columbia, and I am an independent curator and artist, and I am also attending Concordia for an MFA.
Awesome. Naulaq, you're next. Can you please introduce yourself?
Nusakut, Naulaq LeDrew. Good afternoon. My name is Naulaq LeDrew. I'm originally from Apex Hill, Nunavut on Baffin Island. I'm elected elder for TIA here in Toronto Inuit community. I also work for UFT Scarborough as their elder. And my favorite of all is I'm an artist. Thank you.
Awesome. And last but not least, qulliq, if you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm qulliq Partridge. I'm originally from qulliq, Nunavut in northern Quebec. And I currently live in Ottawa. I am director of the Nordic Lab at Saw Gallery, which is an artist-run center here in Ottawa. I'm also an artist and a writer. Super happy to be part of this group today.
Awesome. No, I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be a great talk. So I have 7 questions, and we're going to each have a chance to go first at taking a swing at them. And let's do the reverse order of the introductions. Let's do it that way. So if you don't mind, qulliq, we'll put you up first. So the first question I have, it's a pretty broad one, but I think it's a good way to get the conversation started. And that's just, what do you want people living in the South to know about what it's like being an artist or working at an arts organization in the North? Are there misconceptions? Are there things that people are surprised about? Is there anything that you really want people, to know? So qulliq, I'll let you start, and then we'll pass it on back.
So I can't say too much about that because, like I said, I'm living in Ottawa, although I have recently moved back from northern Norway, and the northern experience there is pretty similar to the northern experience here in what we call Canada. I would just say that it's really about accessibility, access to venues, access to materials, access to even, just being in the right place at the right time to meet people. Although at this point in time, that's sort of hard for most people, which is a little bit equalizing, I think, for artists. But, in the north, in Nunavut, I see all the time that people are still saying that they don't have good internet access, and it really limits things for people. So, even though people are doing everything online now, it's not like everybody in the north has the same access.
Yes, awesome, thank you. Naulaq, would you like to go next and just say what are some things that you would like Southern audiences and Southern people to know about, what it's like being an artist or working with artists living in the north?
Well, I don't live in the north. I live in Toronto. But I was also an artist in the north. It's more difficult here in the south to get your materials, your soapstones, and there's more abundance of galleries to sell them to here in the south. You can do it personally, but up in the north, you can't do it personally. You have to go online and sell your stuff online. Soapstone was the biggest thing that I couldn't find here in Toronto, but thank goodness I did. Although I did work with soapstone for a while, it's more costly. I believe it is more costly down here than it would be up in the north. And up north, their art is taken advantage of. They take their much less money than they would have than down here in Toronto. And I hope somebody breaks those barriers in the near future. Thank you.
Awesome. Teresa, same question to you. Is there anything that you would like people in the South to know about the Northern artist experience or working in an arts institution or arts organization in the North?
Yeah, sure. So I live part-time in Lekwungen territory and then part-time in Yukon. So I'm kind of one of those artists that likes to go back and forth. And I kind of was forced to move south for more opportunity. In the Yukon, what's great about the Yukon is the arts community is so connected. It's really open. It's really always wanting to have more people a part of it. And it's very social in that way. But if you're shown in every gallery in the Yukon, which there's not many, in 1 year, you can't be shown for another 2 years. So you really do kind of lose out on opportunities. And then especially with positions, only position in the arts organizations only open up every once in a while. And there's so many artistic people in the Yukon all going after the same position. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I decided to move south and actually take the chance at gaining other opportunities. But I'd also say things like shipping art is very expensive from the north. Like those kind of basic logistical things people take advantage of in the south, and they don't really realize that my community is 5.5 hour drive from Whitehorse, like to the capital and things like that. So it's logistics as well. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Jessica, would you like to go next?
Sure. I was thinking about what to say, and I think I'll just go for it because so working at this museum here for the last 2 years, I feel like the thing that I would like people to know before they come in here, basically just to talk more openly about racism. It is very exhausting, and it's difficult to specifically kind of talk about in each kind of awkward discussion that comes up. But I think it's something that people can do on their own time, mentally prepare to come into a museum to talk about Inuit culture, to talk about Inuit art, to talk about Nunavut and Iqaluit, right? Like there's something that people can do before they even get here that kind of gives me, I think it would give me a little bit of relief. And it would just, I think, make it easier to talk about the like great things, right? Like I think you can then move in towards the being welcoming and discussing what Inuit would like to share and what we could like to promote and the great information that there is. But I think there's definitely like an initial misunderstanding, an initial imbalance that is pretty exhausting, working in organizations, meeting people, that, you know, at a certain point you have to figure out, okay, how do I deal with it? Or do I just let it build up and then I'll deal with it later? Or do I just hope that it goes away? Or do I just have to leave because I don't want to deal with it and it doesn't seem like it's something that can be figured out? So I feel like that's like a big issue, but it's definitely something I think it becomes easier to just talk about if we just start talking about it.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Brian, you're up next. What would you like people in the South to know about arts in the North or the experience of arts in the North?
Yeah, before I really move on with that, I did want to speak to Jessica's point that like that isn't location specific at all. That is any and every Indigenous organization anywhere. It's like it just saps every bit of your energy trying to deal with, you know, carrying around the racism aspect. Clearly, I'm white coated, so it's, you know, it's not something that I deal with front on or head on quite as much as a lot of people do, or at all for that matter. But I do still, you know, work within an organization with Inuit in the title, and I do provide for Inuit as much as we can. And that aspect of like the difficulty of advocacy because of racism is just like, it's brutal, it's exhausting. And that's the goal, you know, that's what it's intended to be. But for, you know, for Southern audiences, regarding what's difficult in the North that isn't necessarily known, logistics is a huge one. But as part of logistics, communications, you know, like it's, everyone knows that the internet is not the greatest in the North, but a lot of people also don't realize that, you know, the majority of communities don't have cell phone service, and the internet is poor. So the idea that there's going to be a 48-hour turnaround for every phone call and every email is just not realistic. And it also doesn't take into account people's lifestyles. You know, like you might go out on the land for a week or two because you have that amazing luxury and the environment to do that when you live in a more northerly area. I know, you know, when I was living back in Labrador, we'd hit the bush, we'd stay on the land for a week or two. You're not checking your cell phone, you're not jumping on your skidoo to get to the highest peak that you can and check your emails. Like, no, you forget all those things, leave it alone. And yeah, the frustration that I think a lot of people in the South have with trying to communicate with artists in the North is just like a fundamental lack of understanding of what the lifestyle is and what's available to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Tamika, so last one, same question for you.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of you guys mentioned accessibility, and obviously, yeah, I agree with that. That's definitely a thing. And yeah, logistically, just getting to other places and, you know, getting what you need to make your art. Also, Teresa mentioned earlier that the arts community is pretty tight, but it's also that's it, you know. It like I feel like you can only grow to this certain level, and then yeah, you gotta leave, you gotta find other opportunities further than that. So that's definitely not great. The audience is also, you know, it doesn't get bigger than what we have here. And yeah, you mentioned earlier just the fundamental misunderstanding of how things work up here. And yeah, so, and everything's just expensive. If you want to leave town, like the ticket, the getting to the airport, whatever, like depending on if you're in a community, like it's just expensive to do anything other than, you know, just sorry, was that clear? Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah, totally. Thank you. All right, so the next question, and this is, a lot of us had to do this. I had to do this myself, is, you know, we had to leave our homes in order to access school, to go to follow career paths, to, you know, to you know, do things that people would consider to be successful, and people consider it to be a success to leave your community. And at the same time, it's kind of sad when you have to do this. And a lot of us don't have the option. And I guess the question is that, yeah, how can we redefine success so that the people who choose to go away to get their education, you know, can still pursue it, or seen as successful, but so are the people who choose to stay. So how can we redefine success in a way that we view everybody as successful, no matter where you're doing your practice, no matter where you're working in the arts? And I guess how do we even approach this? You know, it's sort of a big question. But I guess so. I guess the question is, I just blanked out for one moment there. Yeah, so I guess the question on this one is, yeah, so what are ways that, you know, we ourselves right now can help, you know, spread some of the success that we've had in the South? How can we spread it back to our communities, and also, you know, redefine just what is seen as successful? So I guess I'll start with Tamika. You went last time, so we'll start with you. Oh, and now you muted.
Oh yeah, thank you. Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, I also had to leave Dawson. Well, for part of my education. So I lived in Dawson and I did my foundation year at SOVA. There was a tiny little art school in there, and that was amazing. And that, I don't know, I feel like that really like it made me want to give back to my community. And I think that is a way that we can be successful in the community. Is just build ourselves up so we can continue to support the people in our town or hometown. And I mean, I think a lot of the reason we also move south is like maybe it's cheaper to live down there. I haven't been living down south for a long time, but it's expensive to live in a cold place. So maybe we could pay people better so we don't feel the need to leave our homes. And yeah, I think those are a few ways that we can be successful at home.
Awesome, thank you very much. Brian, what about you? How can we sort of share the success between the North and South, and how can we redefine what it is to be successful in our communities?
Well, I think a lot of it has to come back to how you define your own success. You know, I know so many artists back home, so many artists in the North that would never consider moving south. Not that there's anything wrong with moving south. You know, it's a trade-off. It's a change. It's a difference. There are pros and cons to each. But as long as you know, you feel as though you're successful in your own right and you're content with it, it doesn't have to mean that you have an extensive LinkedIn page. You know, that's not success. You know, really impressive Instagram posts, that's not success. It should just be about what you're happy with and what to you is the life that you want to lead. I know plenty of people on the coast of Labrador who, you know, I would identify as being incredibly successful because they're so happy. They're just having like such a good life, hunting and living off the land and that kind of thing. And that's something we don't have access to at all in Toronto. So it's just that there are different things that people identify. For those of us that are in the South, and how we can help people out. In the South, people are constantly looking for artists, especially northerly artists. They're constantly looking for something that they identify rightly or wrongly as genuine, as the real thing. And so it's very easy for those of us in the South to be a part of arts juries, interact with different organizations that are looking for people. And if you have contacts, provide them. It's a really great opportunity to travel north and show off your work in the South and make a lot of money and then go back to your life in the North. And that's not something like those lines of communication aren't easy for a lot of northerly artists to establish. But for those of us in the South, we're constantly being asked, like, do you have an artist to suggest? Do you have an Inuk or a Northern Indigenous person to put forward for this thing? So the answer has to be yes. And then you identify the people that really need those opportunities. I was lucky enough to work with OCAD University 2 years ago. And I brought in all kinds of favorite artists, including qulliq, actually. And it was awesome. It was amazing to be able to say, yes, I know somebody who can do this. Yes, I know somebody who can do this, and provide those opportunities. And then everybody gets to hang out and see each other in the South. It was so much fun.
Cool, thanks, Brian. Jessica, what are your thoughts on this? How can folks living in the South and practicing in the South, sort of share some of the success they've been achieving with Southern audiences, and how can we define success within our own communities? As someone that's working at an organization in Iqaluit, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Hi, yes, okay. So I think a little bit that there's just like a group work could work a bit better, because I totally encounter many wonderful artists here in Iqaluit who don't want to talk about their art, don't want to hear the compliment, right? So I feel comfortable saying they're great, and I feel like it would be good for more people to shed spotlights on people they think are doing good work, because I think it's more culturally acceptable to be humble and kind of not promoting yourself. So I think it definitely falls on the rest of us to bring people up. But I mean, it's a difficult question, because there are some things that we wouldn't, I wouldn't want to force on somebody to take on as being successful if you took like financial successes or going down south as the way to do it. Like there's some of that I'm like, yeah, people should be recognized and maybe we can bring that north, but there's a part of it that's superficial and we don't need to include. So I mean, that's like a difficult line. I don't know exactly what it is, but I think there is like a thoughtful way to bring attention to the people who are doing good work, helping them out to know that people appreciate it in the community. I also think it's like not up to the standards of somewhere else to decide what is great here, right? But I don't think that there's many places to have the discussion. Like there isn't Inuk critic living in Iqaluit talking about artwork. I don't know of a blog in which Inuk is talking about what they think about contemporary or traditional or art in general. I don't know where I would then say my point of view as well. Like I don't know how a dialogue could be started that is actually completely separate from the Southern one that kind of comes from something else. Because I believe that in Iqaluit and Nunavut, amongst people, you know who is talented in what, you know what ulu you want made by who, and it's not like secret information, but it's not something that's discussed in the same way. So I could see that it's not the same, but I also am like, but maybe it doesn't need to be. And maybe the only thing we could do is just like be more open with who we think is doing a good job. Just so that more people know what direction that could inspire them or how people can get encouragement. But I mean, we're just talking, right? I don't know.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Teresa, you're up next. What are your thoughts on this about, redefining what is success? Do you need to go south to be successful? Can you be successful in your communities? Or is there, as someone like you who goes back and forth, is there something good in that, in the act of going back and forth?
Yeah, I wrote down while everybody else was talking, I was kind of like trying to jump off some ideas and things. And the thing that comes to mind when we talk about success in the North versus the South is a very intense need to redefine what education is. So my mom was very much like, you're going to university after high school. Like it was just, yeah, there was no question. I had no choice. I had to go to university, and it was a good experience and I needed it. But a lot of students from the North did not finish post-secondary education in the South. There was just, lack of support. They were disconnected from their community, their family, all of this kind of stuff. At least I had family down in the South, so it kind of helped with the success. I didn't feel so alone. But that being said, I'm also at Concordia getting an MFA, which I never thought I would do. And I don't necessarily see that as success. I see that as a necessary step to perpetuate the importance of what my community is doing. It, like, everything that I'm doing in education is so I can go back home. I'm trying to bring everything that I can learn down here back home and offer something, offer a balance in some way, because I don't speak Apatanana fluently. I don't cut out a moose or anything like that. Like, I don't do the things that I think of when I think of being a successful or a good Apatanana woman. I don't have those skills. And what I can do is I'm very academic in my head. So I can go down south, I can gain all of this whatever stuff, go back to my home and offer what I can in that respect. That's the place that I fill, I think, in my community, is I'm that person that will go down south and do that. But that doesn't mean that anybody in my community, absolutely, these are educated people. But how does Western society define education? They define it as a paper. You complete your courses, you get the paper, now you're educated. That's not true in any circumstance in the North. I also think about redefining what artist is. At least in my community, nobody recognizes themselves as an artist except me. So I'm like, I'm sticking the badge everywhere, like, I'm an artist. Well, nobody there recognizes that. They're making art pieces for potlatching. They're doing it for sale. They're doing it for themselves. They're clothing their family members. They're making art constantly, but they're not actually recognizing themselves as artists. So when there's opportunities in the North, like different cultural festivals and things like that, and they do an open call for artists, it's very difficult for community members to actually kind of put in the application, because they're like, well, I don't see myself as an artist. I'm a craftsperson, or I'm just a beater. They'll just kind of define themselves by what they do. I'm a carver, not an artist. I'm a carver. Like, there's kind of that I find in the Yukon. I'm not sure if it's all across the North, but so going back to the question of success, I really see a great need for redefinition of education and what it means to be an artist. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. That's great. Naulaq, you're up next. What about you? How do you think that we can help share success from the South to the North, and how can we redefine success for people that are in the communities and don't have the opportunity to leave?
Well, yes, most people don't have the opportunity to leave to go do their education. But once they work hard on what they really want, they can be successful at getting that. Um, my my younger sister pursued her dream job. Now she has it back home, but she came down to Toronto to educate herself in that field. Um, but there is always a setback on things like financially, especially, and housing are a big thing for being success. Are you successful if you're homeless? Are you successful if you don't have an education? For instance, my husband didn't go past grade 6, and I see him as a successful person because he did all this, he learned everything by himself. He's streetwise. He knows how to put up a computer from scratch. He's mechanic, small engine mechanic. He's Randy. Well, being education is a must need to go where you really want to go. And the North, people don't finish the high school from high school. It's because of financial hardships that they endure. It's financial hardship, or it's housing, or mentality is a big problem too up north. So me living down here, I don't see myself as a successful person, or I didn't see myself as an artist either. I saw myself as a seamstress, a carver, until I went into a gallery and whoa, look at this artist here. Oh, I am an artist. Well, that's my 2 cents there. Thank you.
Thank you. Qulliq, you're up next. So what are your thoughts on this? How can we sort of spread and share this concept of success, and how do we redefine success for ourselves?
I think we need to be aware that, well, within Inuit society anyway, that we should be aware that the idea of what is meaningful and I guess successful is not going to necessarily be in line with what the greater art world thinks is successful. Like you get so many shows and you get, so many articles written about you, and you suddenly have arrived somehow. I think, people are perceived to be successful as artists in the art world at large when that stuff happens for them. But even those people, let's be honest, in the world at large, even those people a lot of times have trouble making ends meet. So I don't know if that's like a kind of success that all Inuit artists want to aspire to. I think within the communities and within our Inuit community, regardless of where we happen to be, success for me is like our people working in creative ways that are fulfilling for them and for the families and for the communities. Are there is there creative knowledge that is being passed on? Is there are the things that are being made and done and performed that are of value for us as Inuit and for us as tools to maybe also make a living, but what do people within our communities want? And I think one way, if we want to talk about having artists from the North have more access to opportunities and things that are in the South, then we need to look at ways that people can be supported to have access to those things while still remaining in their communities. For example, like, when there's grants or funding opportunities or residencies, or is there money for, like a lot of Inuit have the care of extended family members? Is there money to support them to either travel and also have somebody else care for those family members while they're away? Or is there money to bring your small child who you can't leave with somebody else? Or, all the extra expense, like things are also expensive in the North, but then on top of that, there's these other kind of obligations, community obligations that people have that are not usually considered as valid in the kind of down south professional kind of atmosphere, but they really have to be taken into consideration if you want to support Inuit, especially in smaller communities. Also, what was my last thing? Sorry, my train of thought went off with the childcare. There was one more thing, maybe later.
Oh, no worries. If you think about it later on, feel free to bring it up when we get to you next time. Okay, so that's everything for this question. We're gonna move on to the next one, and we'll start with Naulaq. I'll read the question here. It's number 3, and it's that there's a lot of settler organizations that exhibit or sell Inuit and Northern Indigenous art, they're very Indigenous forward facing. They appear to be Indigenous, but when you look at it at the top end, they're actually run by settlers. And there's almost this belief out there, it appears, that we can't run our own organizations. And just what are your thoughts on this? And where do you think these stereotypes come from? And what can we do to stop it? So Naulaq, would you like to answer this one?
Yes, stereotyping. Well, settlers want to be powerful. They want to control whoever they can control. Like they like to put their name out there. Like let's look at the people who went up North Pole, and they were not only Halunaks there. They're not only white society there. There were people who brought them there. But those people who brought them there, were they recognized? No, they weren't even mentioned in any books. So power is what they're after. And besides power, financial well-being. Like, yes, one might have a partner of an Inuk in the Qulliq white person, they might share the establishment, the kind of, they might be partners, but then the qulliq, the white man, gives him more power to the company than the Inuk would. And of course, Inuk always, yeah, go ahead, I don't care, like, do it. So we have to stop that. We have to take back our kind of ourselves, our dignity, our self-esteem. Go after these. Learn. Education is the greatest tool that we can have to this day. So my mind is all over the place right now. So I'll leave it at that for now.
No worries. All right, thank you. I guess we'll do qulliq. We'll do you next. What do you think about this? Where do you think these stereotypes come from, and how can we prove them wrong?
The stereotypes about people thinking that Inuit cannot run things or Native people cannot run things.
Yeah, just a lot of, this is almost like I was saying, there's a lot of organizations that will have an Indigenous name, that will sell Indigenous products or have Indigenous looks. Maybe even like public facing staff will be Indigenous. But if you look at the top organizations, or even if you look at things like the National Gallery or organizations like the Vancouver Art Museum or the Montreal Museum des Beaux-Arts, there's a bunch of these organizations that are not, that have vast collections of Inuit and Northern arts, but the people at the top making decisions are not. And so it's almost as if we can't run our own organizations, we can't represent ourselves in these organizations. So where do you think this sort of stereotypes comes from, and how do we prove it wrong? How do we fight against it?
Well, I mean, it comes from racism, as Jessica was saying at the beginning of her answering questions. Particularly for Inuit, there's been a long history of Inuit being treated as children, and like settlers being seen as like the boss or the parental types, for kind of self-defense, sometimes Inuit have had to accept that and just be like, okay, they're going to be the boss. There's also a cultural aspect of that Jessica had mentioned about humility. Like Inuit we're taught that we're not supposed to try to be better or seem like we think we're better than other people. So like the idea that people climb up ladders in jobs and stuff like that, it's sort of the antithesis of how Inuit would choose people for important positions in life in Inuit society. So there's that, but there's also, it's just the commodification of culture, Inuit culture, Indigenous cultures, art. It's a great commodity, and there's lots of money to be made and lots of prestige to be gained in dealing with this commodity. And so people naturally want to gravitate towards that, especially people who want to make a name for themselves. So I mean, there's all different reasons that people get into things. There's lots of reasons that are good too, but the very basic thing is that there needs to be an insistence that things are run by Inuit, things are run by Indigenous people if they're supposed to represent these people. It's one thing if you're just like a private gallery and you're doing whatever and you want to work with Indigenous people, but if it's an organization that is for Inuit and supposed to represent Inuit, then there should be an insistence, and there shouldn't be any more excuses. I think people have to be working towards that actively. It's not to say that, oh, everybody should just quit from these different organizations. It's that instead of paying lip service and saying, oh, I'm only here until, and then somebody else is going to replace me eventually. Like I've been hearing that for like, I don't know, 20 years. And I know lots of Inuit have been hearing it for many more years before that, ever since any kind of organization came along. You know, the work needs to be done now. I think my one last point is that Alethea Baril, she had made a post about this. I don't know if you remember that, like last year, right? Was that last year? About Inuit organizations should be run by Inuit. And like, it was just so simple what she had said, but it was to see an Inuk saying that, like, and to see the reaction that other Inuit had was like kind of like mind blowing, because I think that a lot of times people don't necessarily just say the very simple thing that needs to happen, maybe because we're just worried that people's feelings will get hurt.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lick. Brian, would you like to field this one next? What are some of the ways that we can break these stereotypes, and where do you think they came from?
Are you calling on me because of how seriously I was nodding my head at everything Takulik was saying?
That's how I base all my who I choose text.
Yes, yeah. I have a very animated bobblehead when somebody is preaching to the choir so well. But yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot to it. There's the cultural aspect, and there's also, I think, to refer back to what Teresa was saying, just the acknowledgement and recognition of different types, varieties, and qualities of education. It's very easy when, you know, you're in the south of what we call Canada, to acknowledge that someone with a master's or someone with a PhD, or with years of experience in an organization or an institution is necessarily more qualified than someone from a more traditional background. There's a deferral to the letters at the end of somebody's name, whether or not that's appropriate, or even in any situation where it just makes or doesn't make any sense. You know, like what your scholastic achievements are doesn't necessarily factor into your qualifications for everything. There's also there's a capitalistic nature to these organizations and institutions, and that isn't something that's culturally based either. You know, like material wealth is not something that we really place a lot of value in as far as I know, any Indigenous communities. The hoarding of wealth and means is not something beneficial to the whole. And, you know, we all know through our teachings, whether it's, you know, grandfather teachings or Inuit Hayumayu Tukangit or something else, we're all better when we're all better. We're all going to benefit if everyone is fed, if everyone has what they need. So a lot of the time, just being an employee or working or making some money to get along is considered, you know, for a lot of people successful. Whereas the spotlight and being at the head of an organization may or may not be appealing to them for exactly that reason. It's not in our traditional teachings to have your name in lights and seek that kind of thing out. And it's uncomfortable. So the other aspect of it, though, like Takulik was saying, is that it's so funny that Alethea made that post and the reactions that followed it, because, like you said, it's something that should be common knowledge. This is something that is well beyond acceptable, if it ever was. But there's a paternalistic nature to this country. There's always been a paternalistic nature to this government and how it acknowledges Indigenous people as, you know, Canada's Indigenous people, who were here thousands of years prior. But there's also a level of acceptance that's kind of hit a lot of our communities, I think, where even people involved just don't see that it's a problem anymore. A lot of organizations will say, well, we have, you know, an Indigenous or Inuit board of directors, that's enough. That's not enough. Like the the board of directors does not influence your office environment. It does not influence the way that people actually work with one another. It's an overseeing body. So unless the EDs of organizations, unless the managers of organizations are all Indigenous / Inuit, then we're not talking about Inuit organizations. So there need to be succession plans in place. And if there aren't, question why there aren't. Like, clearly someone has found a niche for themselves in their career. They're looking for advancement, and they've found what they see as being an easy way to do that. And it's not acceptable in the slightest. So, like, let's start drafting succession plans and sending them out to these organizations. Make it a little easier.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Teresa, you're next in line. So what about you? What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that there's these stereotypes that persist, that we can't run our own organizations? Or do you think there's anything that we can do about that to break these stereotypes? And yeah, and we've heard a lot from the Inuit perspective, but I'm curious to hear from your perspective and if it's different from where you are.
Sure. Wow, there's so much to say on this topic. Yeah, people have already been kind of running with the same understandings that I have as well. There's definitely, to jump off of Brian's conversation, there's definitely something, my partner Chris says this often, and I love it. He says white is the default in Canada. It's just like that's the standard. And there is an odd acceptance in some Indigenous communities of, okay, we're going to start this organization. Oh, but we're not going to hire our own people to lead it. We're going to hire outside of the community because it'll become successful. So there's already a stereotyping within Indigenous communities of ourselves that we can't succeed, I also think about organizations that, yeah, they appear to be very Indigenous. The models that they might have are Indigenous, the products they have are Indigenous, and then the CEO is this old white guy. There is a tokenization of Indigenous people, the artists, anybody involved that is Indigenous, they're being tokenized, full stop, for the benefit of the higher ups that are non-Indigenous. I also think about how many times I've been asked to sit on boards of non-Indigenous organizations, and I've accepted, and I have been pulled back and forth, and they demand so much from me. They want to know, I was recently on this one committee, I won't say what it is, but I was on this committee and they were like, the colors of the logo, are they like Indigenous colors? Like, how do you feel as an Indigenous person when you see the color green or something like that? Like, they were using me in really bizarre ways to check that box of they have this Indigenous perspective and it's all good. But it's also ridiculous because those kind of things I was being stereotyped throughout the entire experience. I was being tokenized, so I had to step away from those organizations and try to guide them outside of the organization to do better, to recognize that. But it is difficult, and it is a huge thing in the Yukon. Like, I'm just thinking of all of the organizations, and yeah, they're definitely not fully run by Indigenous people. We don't have, Tamika, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but not really. I don't think of any organization that's fully run by Indigenous people except for the ICCA. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's, it's frustrating. And it's not that we're not educated. It's not that we don't have the experience. It's the fact that we are being pulled. We're being stretched across all of these different organizations where they have an expectation of what Indigenous people or artists or arts professionals have to offer, and they expect that all for free as well. That's another part of it, is we come with a completely different understanding of the world. We're offering significantly cultural knowledge to some organizations, and we aren't offered anything in return. There's no reciprocal. So yeah, I don't know. There's this, oh, I could talk about this topic for a long time, but I think I'm gonna leave it there and let other people jump in.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and if anybody wants to follow up with a point that somebody else says, or like you really want to continue this, even though you already spoke, just message something in the chat, and we'll come back to you once we get through. So don't feel like you've missed your chance to speak. So no worries there. Jessica, you're up next. What are your thoughts on this? Like as I said earlier, you know, there's a lot of organizations that kind of public facing appear to be Indigenous, but as you look behind it, the management, the organization, boards, leadership, and things don't tend to be Indigenous. And it kind of like creates a stereotype of like we are not able to run our own organizations. And I'm just wondering, I know you mentioned this when we talked earlier, just about like this kind of happens in Iqaluit because people just assume if something's from Iqaluit, it has to be Inuk. So I just like to hear a bit more about that from you and what you think about this, and how do we change these stereotypes? How do we make it better?
I can try to say something. I was thinking about it, and then I like hearing everybody's ideas. It's so fun to like talk about it with people, which I think is actually part of this issue. Maybe with the same of success, but with running an organization, letting people get away with it is sort of our fault, right? Like there needs to be a group of Indigenous people who say no and are specifically prioritizing that stops happening, right? Because people will get away with what they can, which is totally fine and true. So we actually need to do more work to stop them. And I feel like that's like not that fun, right? Like the remedy is we have to do the work. And it's like, oh, that's not what I was looking for. I wanted something like better. So I totally like see the barrier to and how it's been hanging out so long, but like I think there's like a clear, I can't think of any Indigenous group that would be okay with that, right? So there should be like a national basic stance that's just like none of this allowed. Nobody's okay with it. Blanket statement somewhere. You can all reference it. It's a very serious, written in stone thing somewhere, because that's what people react to, right? If it's a law, like if it's something out there that they can't debate, right? Being like, oh, we didn't know. Some people are fine with it and some people aren't. And it's like, no, there actually needs to be a very clear statement that says it's not okay. And I think the other part of it is that I think it makes lots of sense that it's through history, it's set, like organizations are set up in a certain way, and then people just kind of think that it's been that way for so long, so it'll continue to be that way, right? So there's lots of things that I think contribute to what's going on with that. But I don't know what exactly the solution is, because yeah, it's like just more work for everybody, and I feel like we're all busy all the time. But I did want to mention, just because Teresa was talking about boards, I feel like I've been on a board that I had to leave, and I felt like maybe my ideas were too out there, right? Like they were uncomfortable with me being like, no, the entire idea of this organization is wrong, and you've welcomed me onto the board to say that. That's what I'm gonna say here, right? So then you're sort of like, we don't really want you here then, right? Like we didn't want to discuss the overarching issue. We wanted your input on the color of a logo, because we've already decided we're going forward. Like that's not the level of contribution they wanted from an Indigenous person. And I mean, that's weird, because there's nowhere to have the big discussion of like, this is all wrong. How are you doing it wrong? Let's tell you, right? Like there isn't, where's that discussion being had if it doesn't happen at a board level, in the general public, to people when they visit your artwork or when they visit your museum or see, like, because it shouldn't be, also, I totally understand that it shouldn't be on an individual, right? It's something that's for the collection, the collective good. So it's sort of something that should be supported at that level so that people don't feel too singled out about it. So, I mean, those are just things I thought of, but it's it's obviously been going on a lot, and it goes on all over the place. So I don't know how people miss the message that it's not okay, but they missed it somewhere.
Awesome, thank you. Tamika, do you have anything that you'd like to talk to on this subject? I can rephrase the question again if you like.
Yeah, sure.
So
So
yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, so it's just talking about how there's a lot of organizations out there that on the surface appear to be Indigenous at first glance, but or they claim to represent Indigenous people or Indigenous art, but if you look into it, the leadership is not Indigenous, at the top. And it almost kind of creates this, and it happens time and time again, it almost creates like the stereotype that we're not able to run things from the top as Northern Indigenous people. And I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on this? Where did the stereotype come from, and how can we dispel it?
Thank you. Yeah, big question. I think maybe the stereotype kind of comes from just because a lot of these systems were not made by us or made for us. And so just naturally, it's not, I can't speak for everybody, but it's kind of hard to take on a framework that wasn't built by you. So I think we need to take those things apart and kind of rethink them for ourselves. And yeah, hopefully that'll kind of figure out how we can change that. And obviously, like, just getting more Indigenous and Inuit people into these spaces. Yeah, sorry, that's a big question. I think that's everything.
Cool. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add on this subject? I saw a few things going on in the chat. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to say? Qulliq?
Yeah, just adding about like the insistence on having things run by Indigenous people that are for Indigenous people, or Inuit for Inuit. There also is a lot of work that has to be done around supporting Indigenous run organizations to succeed. A lot of the, there's all these forces, again, back to racism, all these forces that press on Indigenous initiatives, Indigenous people, Indigenous artists, to make them not succeed. And some of that is historical trauma, and some of that leads to lateral violence. And, that can really break apart any kind of work that is done within any group because of this trauma that's just banging around and hurting people. And, like within small communities, but like even just within the arts community, there can be, like Indigenous arts community or any arts community, there can be lateral violence. And I think, like people will sometimes point to that and say, well, there's like nepotism, or there's, there's all these things that go on within these things. And that's why there needs to be people from outside. But I don't think that that is an excuse. I think it's just a sign that there needs to be resources put into that. We need, all these things like counseling and mentorship and, the ability to work with people from different areas in order to succeed. And we need to also insist on supporting people to succeed.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We just had a little pause. So I'll go on to our next question. And this one here, we'll start off with Brian, not because he told us a lovely story last, but because his name was written down next to this question on my list. So, being a Northern Indigenous person that's in the South, it can be kind of difficult at times, and not just in the South, but I guess we're talking about national organizations as well, but it can be difficult at times sort of navigating through Indigenous organizations that were created mainly with Southern Indigenous groups in mind, or created on a national level with just sort of a small inclusion for folks in the North. And I'm just wondering, what can these organizations do to be more equitable and more accountable to Northern Indigenous people, both Northern folks living in the South and folks up North as well?
Well, I mean, honestly, that's a really good question, and it's it's been a big part of kind of the advocacy work that I've been trying to do with the Toronto Inuit Association, is just like, you know, telling our cousins in the South here that, you know, the medicine wheel isn't necessarily the most welcoming image for Inuit. And for any Inuit who've had negative experiences amongst other Indigenous folk, like it can be the kind of thing that turns you away. So, you know, I think it's really important that, and this goes for everything. Like this is just, you know, rule one, is just have more inclusion, right? Like be more inclusive, and that includes Inuit, even on Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat territory. I know that's not necessarily the easiest thing, but if you know one of us, you know many of us. Like, just if I'm too busy, I can send someone. But like we're all over at this point. We have urban Inuit organizations in every major city in the country right now. Reach out to us, give us a call. We might only be 3 staff strong, but we definitely know where everyone else is. And inclusion, you know, for every stage, there needs to be inclusion. And a lot of the institutions, I should say, around here don't recognize, like Teresa was saying earlier, in terms of, you know, is this Indigenous? How does this make you feel as an Indigenous person? Here, you know, if one of us were to go to the hospital and ask for something that's specific food for us, chances are we're going to be served like Three Sisters soup, which is delicious, but it's certainly not something I grew up with. And it has no bearing on northern communities whatsoever. Give us some country food, you know? Yeah, that's about all I got for that one.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Tamika, what about you? As someone who's living in the North, how can the national organizations that represent Indigenous people be more accountable and more inclusive of Northern folks, especially when like, you know, in the arts?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you talked about outreach a bit, and I think that's really important. And just, I guess, seeing your gaps, which is kind of hard, obviously, but finding those gaps and addressing them, maybe like targeted sort of, you know, like, oh, we need this person, you know, we need more representation here, and like finding those people and filling those gaps, and make sure, you know, you're everything's planned out and clear, and, you know, do it properly, and not just move ahead because, you know, oh, we couldn't find that person, or we couldn't fill that, you know, position. Like, do it right, make sure everybody's there. Yeah, and I mean, this is probably not really relevant right now because nobody's traveling, but like, if bringing people from the north to the south, there should be like funding for that traveling, like, you know, because that's a huge barrier, is just like having the money to even go anywhere. So a lot of those opportunities or voices aren't being heard because of that. Yeah, so I think that's what I got for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa, I have you here next. Yeah, what are as someone who does go back and forth quite a bit, as you were saying earlier, what's some things that organizations in the South that serve Northern Indigenous folks, or organizations that target Indigenous folks nationally, what are some things that they can do to be more equitable and more accessible for folks up north and for Northerners living in the South?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the thing that I wrote down in my little notebook was Whitehorse is the South for Yukon. So for Yukon, I guess there's 2 kind of different distinctions that I see. I think Whitehorse organizations, like organizations that are based in a capital city in the north, also fail at community engagement. So in that regard, you know, it's even things like applications that have to be done online. And there's no, you know, there's no kind of conversation, or, you know, they can't pick up a phone and call and actually do their application that way. I think of like specifically artists in that regard. But also organizations, arts organizations need to realize that they're not the priority in Indigenous communities. This is something that I constantly have to tell people, and this also relates to Indigenous organizations as well, is we run governments. We are the health department. We are education. We have to be, Indigenous people have to be completely informed about everything, every aspect of life, because somebody is doing it in their community. Somebody is running the health department. Somebody is running the education department. Somebody is on chief and council. There are so many layers to Indigenous governance that when your call out for whatever arts program or something with your organization, probably not going to be received or not going to be responded to. There has to be a bit of a champion in those communities to actually encourage people to embrace the arts organizations. And the other thing about it is, if people don't know your face, they won't respond. That's just a basic thing with every Indigenous community, is you have to be known to that community. That means you have to take the time out of your day and go and meet with people, like actually sit down with people, have a tea, have a conversation so they know who you are, rather than just a number on a phone or an email address. But in regards to even thinking about like arts or like organizations outside of Yukon trying to attract Northern artists, I think of the ICCA. So when formerly known as the ACC came to Whitehorse, there was a huge conversation. You know, this is an Indigenous organization, but at that time when they came to Whitehorse, Yukon, this was several years ago. I can't remember when it was. Tamika, do you remember what year that was? 2008 or something? I can't remember. Maybe before. I can't remember either. Anyway, so when the ICCA came up to the Yukon, at that time, they didn't have any Northern representatives. So they had nobody on the board or in the organization that was from the Yukon, and they were coming to Whitehorse. And we had to have this huge conversation about what does that mean? You're an Indigenous arts organization from outside of the Yukon wanting to host something in the Yukon. You have to follow Yukon First Nation protocols. And it's completely different. We are all Indigenous, absolutely. We have commonality in our history with colonization. That is what makes us Indigenous, and that's what makes us kin. But our cultures are very, very different. I would not go anywhere else and try to host an exhibition or an event using my protocols in your territories, because I have no idea what your protocols are. I would have to make a relationship in those territories outside of my own and develop, what does that look like? What does my organization look like going into your community? It's the host nations that have to decide what those events look like and how they engage with those arts organizations from outside of their territories. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. Jessica, we have you up next. And the question is just what can national organizations do that work with Indigenous people do to be more equitable and more accessible and representative for Northern Indigenous folks? What are your thoughts?
Hi. So I'm thinking about it, and I'm trying to think about what, I guess personally, like something that I try to think about when I encounter or hear things about Southern-based kind of organizations, is that like I don't hold it against a place that they can't do everything, right? Like if they have experience in certain things, I'm kind of like, perfect, you probably do that really well. Like I wouldn't know, like that's fine. So it definitely creates a different, yeah, like a lot of work needs to be done to become something different than what you are. So it would be weird to think that you could go to the Yukon and do something the way you were doing it somewhere else. Like I agree. And I feel like it creates, like I then question how they wouldn't have thought about it, right? So I think it's it's totally fine to have limitations and recognize what you are doing. And I think it's important, and I would hold it against an organization if they don't communicate that clearly. So I think it's really important to use the proper terms and not to use them because it would make you sound good if you're a national organization that represents all Indigenous people of Canada, right? Like that sounds good for you. But if you're not doing that well, then you can change what you call yourself. And then that creates real expectations and understanding, which I think is, I often get bugged by something saying Indigenous, but maybe only representing or having something present, like say it's an event or something like that, but only having something present that is First Nations. And I'm like, that's not a problem. But if you've used the term Indigenous Canadian event and you don't have representation from each Indigenous group under the Canadian federal, like 3 groups of Canada, then you're not doing that. And now I think you're probably not doing a good job at everything else you're talking about doing. So it just is a little clue and hint that you can give people to show that you're thinking and that maybe you're something with certain limits now and you hope to be bigger and more connected. Like, I don't think that would stop you if you're communicating properly. I think that's a really good first kind of question to ask your own organization. And that's definitely something I personally use to judge things. So if something says that they're going to cater or recognize Inuit, then I expect a higher bar from them. And if they don't meet that higher bar they themselves told me they're trying to meet, then they're gonna get like a failing mark from me, right? But if they know they're not doing certain things, then I'm like, that's fine. That's a good, truthful conversation we're having. That's okay. So like, I don't know, I live in Nunavut and I appreciate not being around Southern organizations as much as possible. So, I mean, I can't, I can't help too much with other parts of it, but I think using the right terms really makes me feel comfortable that someone has thought about it and knows what they're talking about. Because if somebody uses the wrong term in an email, then I don't take them seriously. So it's to their advantage to do it correctly.
Awesome, thank you, Jessica. Qulliq, you're up next. Is there something that you think that these organizations that either cater to a national Indigenous audience or for like Northerners living in the South, is there anything that that focus on Southern Indigenous organizations or peoples, is there anything that these organizations can do to be more equitable or more accessible or better reflect Northerners?
Just what Brian said, make sure there's an Inuk or somebody from the North or more than one person from the North involved in stuff. You know, like I think Canada prides itself on being the true North, but like everything's like sort of stacked along the border and people think like horizontally along the border. And then the North is still this exotic place where you have expeditions. And this is this is like a kind of myth that serves the whole idea of going to the North and just extracting all the minerals and whatever, because it's not populated still. It's only populated by adventurers and the odd Inuk and husky dog. So, you know, insist, again, I'm always talking about insisting, but like insist on having Northerners involved in things. To be honest, a while back, my first kind of understanding about the former ACC, the former Aboriginal Curatorial Collective, now you guys are ICCA, was that there were not any Inuit involved and that there hadn't been for quite some time, and that it felt like, you know, an oversight that was just not made Inuk feel that they were not invested in this organization. So I'm really happy today to see that this is Northern, with Northerners from different parts of the North. And I hope that this organization will continue to make more inroads into the North. For other organizations, like we're talking about, like Canada Council or things like that, like these organizations, they've been going on for years about how they want more Inuit, they want more Northerners involved in things and banging their heads on things and asking, maybe we should have another forum or panel discussion, or what's the word? What, you know, when they bring all kinds of people together to, in who knows where, New Brunswick or something, for some meeting, and then they want to ask people, well, what should we do to get more people involved? Well, you know, you have to go and do things that communities say that they want, and they don't need to have a big forum to tell you what they want. You just have to, you know, make connections and yeah, show up and get to know people. Like, go and visit Jessica in Iqaluit and go up to Whitehorse, go up, or beyond Whitehorse. Like you said, Whitehorse is the south, but you know, it's just about small connections every day that need to happen. I think this is also like not just a like north-south thing, but it's like a city, not city thing. Like a lot of people who are, you know, centered in the city, all these things that are centered in cities, like people just start to have city think, and like, you know, if you've grown up in the North or whatever, like you kind of sometimes hark back to like, oh yeah, well this, I'm starting to think like a city person, you know? I think we need to be aware of those smaller connections that create the big connections.
Oh, that was great. Thank you, Dr. Naulaq, would you like to go next? Just talk about how organizations that are made for, you know, mainly with Southern Indigenous people in mind, can work better to serve Northern Indigenous people living in the South, and organizations that sort of have a national scope that are mainly thinking about the South. How can they be better for Northern Indigenous people, more equitable, more have better access? What do you think?
I'm sorry to say, no comment.
All right, no worries. We can pass on that one and move on to the next question. So the next one I have, Teresa, I wrote everybody's name next to one question. So Teresa, I got you down to go first on this one. And that is, what kind of resources would you like to see develop for your community that you think would really help artists and arts organizations where you're from? And how would you like to see it delivered? Because it's all about the delivery, you know, how it arrives. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh my gosh, I'm so not prepared.
You can take a minute to think about it if you need to.
No, it's fine. I can answer it. I guess whenever there's anything happening for my community, it's either something that I've brought to my community, like a festival or a call or something like that. I'm like, hey, people, apply for this. I will help you write it. And then if I'm thinking about, like, you were talking about arts organizations, so Canada Council obviously is a huge one for funding ability. And it's something that I apply for, and I always end up doing applications and funds for something in my community to do. So it's either workshops or talking about public art and stuff like that. But I'm kind of the only one. And there's really, you know, it's all volunteer. You know, like that's another part of it, is there's no position within my First Nation for, we don't have a cultural department or anything like that, or a history department or anything like that within my First Nation. It's too small. We're about 250 members in total, and 40 of them live within the community of Beaver Creek. And it's more of, I see resources needs like more accessibility for things like funding, more accessibility for things like even just basic things like exhibitions, or walking an artist through what that means, if that's something that they're interested in. And that's something I'm starting to do with my community. You know, members are like, are these moccasins, can they be put in a show? And they're starting to like see that ability of these moccasins aren't just something that I can give away or sell, but I can actually make continuous money from it if I'm showing them an exhibition. So walking community members through that. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this question. Maybe I'll have something more after, but yeah, more access and things with like Canada Council. If we think about like, even if somebody from the Yukon wanted to work for Canada Council, I've had this conversation with a lot of people, they require to be bilingual in English and French. And I don't know about everybody here, but in the Yukon, I don't know that many Indigenous people that speak French. I don't. So those kind of things that we understand with national organizations, that there's this bilingual aspect, it really turns off a lot of Northern Indigenous people with that kind of regard. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm done.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Teresa. Jessica, I have you up next. Your next one in order. So, what are some resources that you would like to see mobilized or brought into your community that you think would help artists and arts organizations, and how do you think they should be delivered?
Hey, okay, so I think this is like a good question to answer with just like the big things, right? So just be like, oh, let's get rid of racism. Like that's a good overarching resource, I think, that would help artists organizations, the whole community. And I think we've talked about how a lot of individuals need lots of other supports. So I feel like all of that, like more housing for people, even a location for people to workshop and make their art. Like there isn't a safe space inside for that in Iqaluit unless people individually have solved something. So I mean, like that's a big, lots of big asks, I guess. So the other thing I'd say is just like money. You could just give me money and we could just hire people to do things that they would be creative and feel not like they have to cater to a market or cater to a request from a Southern organization. It's actually, I think, would be great to get direction from people in the community. And I think that means meeting them where we are. So if we don't have a place to discuss what we'd want art to be, then we need to create that space, and that needs to be funded by something, because a person needs to make sure it's a priority for other people and invite them to discuss it, right? So sometimes I'm like, yeah, I sort of know a little bit, but the problem actually is we haven't talked about it for me to give an answer of any sort. I don't feel comfortable answering those questions when I'm not the only person who needs to be asked. Actually, most people who need to be asked haven't been asked yet. There isn't a venue, there isn't a good welcoming way to meet somebody where they are to say, yeah, you carve things, that's great. Did you know there's this whole other aspect of what you're doing that's amazing too, and we want to hear if you want to talk about it, right? Like, and we'll pay you to do that, because we know that people don't just have free time. That's not a thing. So I think there's like a big missing part that I think is in a direction people aren't talking about, and that there isn't an organization that's like, yeah, we're Canada Council and we just want to encourage you to talk about art where you are, so that you figure out what's needed where you are. Not, right? Like there's such expectation that comes from somewhere else that isn't very useful.
Cool, thank you. Tamika, I have you next in the lineup. What are some resources that you think that could help, if they were mobilized, could help your community in terms of arts and arts organizations, and how would you like to see them delivered?
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking about this one a little bit, just because I work with funding, and we're always trying to improve our outreach and just like get people to apply that have never applied before. So I think low barrier, flexible funding, a really accessible application process. So just like having different options for people to apply, like maybe they want to do a recording or they want to sit with somebody and we can walk through it together. Because yeah, funding applications are just not easy for anybody. And the only people that are getting funded over and over are the ones who can write good applications, you know? And so that's the writers. It's not always, yeah, anyways. And then, yeah, having targeted funding for communities, or yeah, just like finding those spots where we need to work on and having funding specifically for that. And talking about having, yeah, like a more meaningful outreach, so building relationships instead of like, you know, contracts like, oh hey, you know, this is our relationship, you know, like you need to, yeah, it needs to be a relationship because they need to respect you and they need to trust you throughout that process. So making sure that that's your first goal, is that I want to build a relationship with this person and help them, you know, go through that. Indigenous mentoring opportunities, that would be great. Less turnover in organizations, so we can have like long-term relationships with, you know, artists that are applying to things, or just artists that are coming through. Yeah, and just helping people build confidence in applying for these things or showing up to these organizations, you know. Yeah, I think that's what I got for now.
Cool, thank you. Naulaq, same question for you. Are there any resources that you'd like to see mobilized for your community that you think will help artists and arts organizations? And how would you like to see it delivered, specifically for Southern Inuit or Inuit living in the South?
I totally agree with Tamika. We do need funding. And spaces, we need spaces. We need spaces, so we need the money to get that space. Resources, lots of resources out there, but we need to bring that in. We need to ask more artists what they really want to see in that field. Money, we need money. That's it.
Sorry, I couldn't find my cursor there for a moment. Qulliq, we have you up next, and also very cute kitty there, very handsome. Yeah, we have you up next, and we're just wondering, are there what kind of resources would you like to see mobilized to support artists and arts organizations in the North, and how do you want to see them delivered?
I agree with Jessica. It's like the big asks. There, you know, people need space and support to be able to make and create and work on things. You know, as everybody already knows, there's a housing crisis in Inuit territories, and I would assume in other northern communities. So on top of people not having a space to create, they don't necessarily have any personal space at home anyway. So like it's extra needed that there needs to be space where people can go to and leave their work, and they don't have to you know, like try to put it away in the laundry room or whatever. Also, like with those spaces, there needs to be a lot of support. Like I'm thinking about like the theater in qulliq. If you've ever been to qulliq, there's a whole theater there that's at the city hall, and it's been there for quite some time. But it hasn't been used to its maximum capacity as far as, you know, creating theater works. Although that, you know, there is a lot more movement towards that now, but, you know, like for however many years it's been there, you know, there could have been a really vibrant performing arts scene happening. There's lots of throat singers and, you know, there are artists who are really working on things. And I think that there's space there for more to happen. and also for, just in education and in, even at the elementary and secondary school levels, like it needs to be presented as an option that being an artist or working in creative work is a valid career, and to show that with supports that come along with it, so like affordable housing, subsidies, bursaries, things like that. Yeah, money. With now it said money, definitely money. But like I'm thinking, because for like art, it's not just art. It's not art and then culture and then whatever. It's like creative work is something that's just integral to our way of living. And I wish that when I was a kid, taking, like, going to culture class and stuff, I wish somebody had said to me, like, this is the most important thing. This is your most important class. Like, it was just kind of a throwaway class where we had like, or it was seen as that kind of like, it was like, oh, well, you're just going to culture class. You could just like, at the end of the day, you could just leave early if you want or something, Sometimes it was like that. Sometimes there's some really great, amazing things that happen. But like, for me, that was my most important class. And I want to see that, sort of emphasized. And also for, Inuit kids living in the South, like to have access to some of that knowledge. We haven't even touched on that, and like we're almost done our conversation, but like, how do you have this continuity of culture and creative traditions when you live away from your home base, for all kinds of reasons? And one of them, again, going back to the housing crisis, one of them is the housing crisis. So I'd like to see a lot more support for those activities for people of all ages, and not just the so-called professional level artists. Because, that really goes to how we value creative work in our communities. It's not just as art that is for sale, it's as something that is integral to who we are.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Lick. Brian, you're going to be the last one that we hear from today. We're going to wrap it up after you. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on this? How do you think that organizations can better mobilize resources to support artists and arts organizations in the North, and how do you think they should be delivered? And also, for that matter, for Northerners living in the South.
So my very, very quiet dog just decided to come say hi because qulliq's very impressive chainsaw cat has been hogging up all the space so far. I've got three things, all built off of things that other people have already said. I'm not feeling terribly original anymore. It's like 5 o'clock. So the Bill C-91, or an act respecting Indigenous languages, had no teeth and it was really weak. I think building upon what had been said earlier about the Canada Council, organizations that do try and encourage bilingualism, of course, hats off, but it's time for these organizations and not just the federal government to recognize the languages of the land. If you are even just a little bit bilingual in an Indigenous language, then that should count as 2 colonial languages. Like we need these people in these positions. And part of the reason is, to go back to something Tamika was saying, is the difficulty of these applications is absurd. We, as the Toronto Inuit Association, had tried to assist 3 Toronto artists to apply for a provincial arts grant. And I'm not talking about a lot of money. I'm talking about actually a very small amount of money. And it probably cost us, in having our program coordinator assist filling out these applications, about as much as it would have cost, about as much as it would have rewarded the artists should they have gotten it. But all 3 artists actually backed out of the application process because it was such an enormous drag on their time, when they should be creating. They shouldn't be filling out applications that take days or weeks in, you know, a second or third language, depending on where you're from. So accessibility with applications, accessibility and acknowledging and respecting Indigenous languages is enormous. That should be higher on your CV than anything else, in my personal opinion. I say as a unilingual person. And the other thing, again, not to harp too much on the Canada Council, who do a lot of great work, but like, everybody doesn't need to live in Ottawa. I'm just gonna say it, like, work happens where we live. Culture happens where we live, wherever that is. So it would be great if all of these different federal institutions had representatives in Whitehorse, in Yellowknife, in Iqaluit, in Kuujjuaq, in Happy Valley Goose Bay, all over the place. There's no reason that it isn't the case already. And by centralizing everything, you're losing far more than you're gaining. You know, we found out over the last calendar year, there is absolutely no reason to work in a cubicle beside another person in a lot of what we do. A lot of it can be done across a computer screen and is anyway. Let's cut out the 9 to 5. Let's quit the commute. Let's stop flying people all over this country in order to get people to different events, and just recognize the value in living in a place, the value that comes from the land that we as Indigenous people all know. It isn't in every suburb. It isn't in every urban city center. Respect where people live and let them continue to live there, work there, and love their lives there. How
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Well, that's all we have for today. It was such a great conversation, and it was so awesome hearing all these different perspectives from all across the North, and to hear our differences, but also to hear how a lot of the times we're saying the same things in different ways, or we're experiencing the same things differently. It just kind of gives perspective and helps us to, you know, feel more connected. And I'm glad all of you folks are out there. I'm glad you're all working in the arts and in your organizations and working with your communities. And that's just, we just need more good people doing good work. So Nakumek, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for talking to us today.